Prevention Month fundraising breakfast will take place on April 20th at Wilder Foundation in St. Paul. The event will explore the importance of natural supports like families, friends, and neighbors for keeping families safe and strong. We will highlight data from our second annual Family Wellbeing Index, and participants in our Bright Beginnings Young Parent Mentorship Program will share how establishing supportive mentor-mentee relationships have changed their lives. We hope that people will walk away from the event with a better understanding of how we can all prevent child abuse and neglect by creating supportive connections for parents, children, and families. Special thanks to key sponsors of the event, including Hubbard Broadcasting, Rudy Luther Toyota, Delta Dental, the East Minneapolis Exchange Club, the Painters and Allied Trades for Children's Hope, and Metro Sales. FamilyWise also just announced our 2023 Pinwheels for Prevention awardees, which you can find listed on our website. This year, we recognized 14 organizations across Minnesota that were nominated for the outstanding work they do in support of children and families. We will be lifting up and raising awareness of these organizations throughout April and encourage you to learn more about their work. And lastly, we are raising awareness of child abuse prevention and protective factors for families through toolkits for parents and partners. We've created a social media toolkit for statewide prevention partners to easily communicate about this issue with their constituents. And we're working on a resource kit for parents that we partner with across our programs with practical tips for strengthening the well-being of their own families. You can learn more about the CAP Month activities and register for our upcoming breakfast event at our website. And you'll notice that Child Abuse Prevention Month is right on the homepage. Also, as FamilyWise continues to grow into our prevention work, we are seeing opportunities for us to be more of an advocacy role for families. Before the merger, FamilyWise was really making a difference family by family. Now our scope has expanded to include statewide prevention efforts. We are also helping whole communities identify ways that they can better support families. We are also naturally moving toward advocacy through our new parent leadership program, which will partner parents with systems and organizations to help ensure the best possible outcomes for families. We are in the very early stages of developing what advocacy might look like at FamilyWise. We were recently selected as an advocacy technical assistance recipient from Prevent Child Abuse America. It's exciting to have guidance from experts in this field as we start to identify advocacy goals and build an internal infrastructure to help us meet our goals. In the meantime, we're supporting the agendas of some of our partners, such as the Greater Twin Cities United Way, the Minnesota Coalition for Targeted Home Visiting, and in particular, the adolescent mental health proposal that has been proposed from the Department of Health. We are also supporting the reauthorization of the national CBCAP funds. And we also had staff and interns attend the Social Work Day on the Hill and meet with legislators, particularly those from districts in which our physical offices are located. It was a great experience for our staff and our interns to learn and better understand the process. And as we think about advocacy, I think it's a great time to spend some time talking today about a public policy issue that's very relevant to FamilyWise, and that's the protection of the Indian Child Welfare Act. I'm thrilled that we have a FamilyWise staff member, Dee Dee Drift, our Director of Tribal Projects, with us today to talk about ICWA, as well as the work that Dee Dee is doing in tribal communities. So welcome, Dee Dee. Can you tell us a little bit about the work of, about what you've been working on?
Hello, everyone. So I've been promoting the Remembering Resilience podcast in various tribal communities. And I've also been working on a couple of initiatives involving tribal leaders and other change makers with the hope of bettering the lives of children throughout the state. One of those initiatives in particular was when I was asked to testify in the state legislature committee hearing in favor of the Minnesota Indian Family Preservation Act. We call it MIFPA for short. MIFPA was codified from the Indian Child Welfare.
That's great. And can you just tell us maybe in a sentence about the podcast? I'm not sure not everyone here today has heard about Remembering Resilience. And where they could potentially find the podcast if they wanted to listen to it.
They could find it on our website. There's links. Otherwise, a lot of the literature that I hand out, postcards, flyers, have the QR code where you can just pull it right up and it brings you right to the website. A lot of what I love about the Remembering Resilience podcast is that it touches on historical trauma, but then it also gradually steps into resiliency plans for communities. And just making progress for us tribal people in healing. That's what I love about it the most.
And Dee Dee, you've been doing a lot of work like promoting the podcast, but also bringing forward some of the conversation guides so that communities can kind of listen to it together and then have a conversation about, I think, as you would say, how we move forward. Is that a good way of defining the conversation guides?
Yeah, those were recently launched. So I'm hoping to get into each of the tribal communities and having conversations with them, circle conversations and discussing, and then hopefully handing over the reins to them so that they can then spark their own circles and grow from there. So planting seeds, basically.
Awesome. So today we wanted to talk to you a little bit about ICWA. In a sentence or two, can you talk a little bit about what it is and why it's so important?
So many speak of the boarding school era and General Richard Pratt, the ideologies that he had of, quote, kill the Indian, save the man, unquote. During that boarding school era, many of our Native children were forcibly removed from their homes, losing all their ties to family and culture in an attempt to colonize us. ICWA was enacted in 1978 to rectify those policies and to ensure when Native children were removed from their homes, they were placed with family members or relatives. Here in Minnesota, MIFPA is a supplemental bill that added language to ICWA in 1985. Why is it important? I would say because many boarding school survivors and their families are still suffering from the effects of the boarding school era. And this results and shows up in social problems that lead to alarming rates of out-of-home care for Native children. This is why these bills are so important. We continue to need protection for family preservation.
And we know that there is a current case in front of the Supreme Court that is challenging the constitutionality of ICWA. What do you think is important for people to know about that?
Well, I can share an example of my personal plight with the reasons why I support ICWA so strongly. I had to fight county systems for my nieces and nephews to be placed with me. I was a licensed foster home. My sister was as well. And both times the children were removed, we weren't contacted or notified. The last instance, by the time my brother reached out for help from us, the county was in the process of terminating his parental rights. So failing to notify us for an out-of-home care placement was a violation of ICWA. The current lawsuit today that the Supreme Court heard calls ICWA a commandeering law. Basically, they're saying the federal law is forcing state laws to take action that they otherwise would not take. A gentleman with ties to the White Earth Reservation is leading the charge, claiming it's a race-based law. I think his argument would be valid if the federal government didn't have a trust responsibility with tribes, coupled by the fact that we is still in need of federal protection to keep our families intact.
That's a great way of framing it up, that in need of federal protection to keep our families intact, and to recognize that, you know, tribes are sovereign, and their relationship with the federal government is different than maybe others have with sort of their state or local governments. So I think that's really helpful to kind of lift up and identify. What are the responses that you're seeing in our state and others to address the vulnerabilities and these challenges to ICWA?
When I attended the Senate hearing, all but one voted in favor of MIFPA, which makes it a standalone bill. So in the event ICWA is deemed unconstitutional, MIFPA will then come into place. In the House, it was a different story. It was a complete victory. All lights lit up green, full support unanimously for MIFPA. And I'm so thankful to all the people that worked on this bill, from tribal attorneys to tribal leaders who were providing their testimony, telling the hard stories of our childhoods, basically. And all of the senators and House representatives that pushed this forward. Senator Kunesh and Keeler were the leads in both the House and Senate on it. And from what I hear, we will be having a celebration of the MIFPA bill in the future. So I'm really looking forward to that event at the Capitol.
That's wonderful. Is there anything else that you would want people to know about the work that you're doing?
I would say that it's something that I think I've always wanted to do. Growing up on the reservation, I didn't know why I was the way I was until I started learning. For my bachelor's degree, I was finally able to learn about Native history. That was unheard of, because all through high school, we're taught about mainstream history. So once I learned that and realized this is why I'm not fluent in my language, the boarding school era. But I think what's important to know is that we're changing our narrative. Many of us don't abuse alcohol and drugs. Some do, but we're learning our language. We're reclaiming our culture and our every practice that we have. Our cultural heritage, we're reclaiming and getting it back, and sitting at the table, such as Kunesh and Keeler. We are now at the table, and I think it'll just continue to grow from there.
Thank you, Dee Dee. So now I'd like to open it up if anyone has any questions or comments about either directly for Dee Dee or about anything that we're working on here at FamilyWise, and would love to hear from you if you have thoughts or questions. And you could put them in the chat, or you could unmute yourself and just speak.
Hi, Dee Dee. My name is Shannon Schaff. I actually sit on the board at FamilyWise. And first, I wanted to thank you for sharing with us today. This is a topic that is near and dear to me, as I have many Indigenous family members. But so I did get the benefit of learning from my aunts and my cousins. Even though I wasn't learning it at school, I did get to learn a lot about different Indigenous cultures through my family. But my question is, how does it affect our surrounding states if there is a change at the federal level? Minnesota, it sounds like, has put some protections in, but we know too that we have a lot of Indigenous people in Dakotas and Wisconsin. So how and people don't stay within state boundaries. So how could that potentially affect like our surrounding states and communities that way?
Sure. So the only other state that I know that took the lead and as progressive as Minnesota is Montana. They have a bill moving through similar to our MIFPA bill. I dread to think about the turmoil if ICWA is deemed unconstitutional. The the placement preferences go away. And we will revert back to the Richard Pratt ideologies. Our children will be adopted out at alarming rates, losing connection to culture, language, all of it. And as of right now, I mean, we are a vanishing race right now. That will just accelerate that. And I'm really praying that that does not happen. Does that answer your question? I think it would have like a domino effect for not only for families, but then you get into the federal trust responsibility and the treaties, and it could be catastrophic. And I'm hoping that doesn't happen.
Yes, thank you. Is there action that people can take to help stop that from happening?
Unfortunately, at this point, no. The U.S. Supreme Court heard all the arguments. That same gentleman who was leading that charge actually objected to Minnesota in the work that was going into the MIFPA bill. But thankfully that was unsuccessful, and our leaders pointed us in the right direction. So all we're waiting for now is for the U.S. Supreme Court to just come down with their decision. But thank you for asking.
Well, I would add, I think the more we can do to raise awareness about this issue, I think that's really important, because I think that that could hopefully help, bolster other cascading effects from happening, or other things coming forward. And I think it could encourage other people to take action on behalf of this. So I think we really need to raise awareness. I think there's a lot of people that don't recognize the real threat that exists. And, Shannon, to your point about the different states, I mean, we already hear from child protection across the state how difficult it is when they have cases that cross state lines. And so I think even really looking at how we support our state and our workers, making sure that our child protection departments are fully staffed so that they can potentially try to claim jurisdiction in some of these areas when maybe when cases cross state lines, because I think that could be helpful. And the more support we can provide in that area, I think we would find that actions in Minnesota are certainly more beneficial to families than they would be in some of the neighboring states if ICWA is overturned.
Or mirroring MIFPA.
Yes.
Getting all the other states on board. If that happens.
Other questions or comments?
Yes, I'd like to comment. I'm John Sovigian from Ely. Dee Dee, I had the privilege of taking a culture and language class from Karen Drift and Lester while he was still with us.
Yeah.
And this has brought me in contact with acquaintances at Boys Fort, where I've, with them, advocated for some of the family-wise programs, particularly wraparound, high fidelity wraparound, and Circle of Parents. The efforts have basically gone nowhere. I think there's a problem with lack of cultural competence, if you will, in the content presentation. And I'm hopeful that, although you've got your hands full with these legislative and regulatory matters at the moment, I'm hopeful that you can marshal some focus of resources on bringing our programs at FamilyWise into a state that our friends on reservations find acceptable. I don't know that they don't find them acceptable. It's just that I think if they were recognized as culturally competent, that it would be an easier adoption of those kinds of programs.
Absolutely. Yeah, I agree. And I have been working with some individuals from Boys Fort as well. And I visited the Boys Fort Urban Office in Minneapolis and brought a lot of Family Wise's content there for distribution. And just in that one visit to the urban office, we reached 700 Boys Fort band members living in the metro area. So we're plugging away.
Great.
But thank you for your help on that as well.
Well, I'm happy to share my contacts with you. You probably know all of the individuals, but you might not know that they've had some interest in our programs at Family Wise.
That would be perfect. I would love that. Thank you.
We'll make sure that we connect you, Dee Dee, with John later. John has been instrumental in like really revolutionizing and making sure Circle of Parents is expanded, and then was fundamental in getting RAP adopted in St. Louis County. So I think the two of you would be a great connection. We'll make sure that happens.
Okay.
Then I thought I heard somebody else start to speak. Was there another question or comment?
Yeah, hi, Dee Dee. It's Chris Matter. I just wanted to ask, I think I heard a little bit of this in your conversation with John and his question, but how the work that I know you're newer to the work and starting to get out and make connections with the community. Just curious, what's been the response as you've been talking about speaking with people around the Remembering Resilience podcast and the curriculum, just a initial response that you're getting?
It's fairly new. I believe I went, well, some of the tribal communities are already familiar with it. Let's start there with like Leech Lake, Fond du Lac, Mille Lacs. So I've been trying to focus mainly on the ones that we haven't reached out to yet, like Boys Fort, Grand Portage, even some conversations with Red Lake. So I plan on moving forward with the podcast conversation guides once they can. So right now I'm just encouraging them to listen to the podcast. I primarily focus on the first one because that's where I feel is the most important for raising awareness and education. Because many of our people, we don't know what happened to us. All we know is there's a disconnect there. We can't speak our languages, but we're learning. And I think we need to focus on the root first. So I'm really encouraging them to listen to the first episode, season 1, and then I'll be touching base with them on that after and give them some time. I think it was just last week that I was at the urban office. So I have all these plans and goals in my mind, but I strongly feel that's where we start. Because many don't know what happened to us during the boarding school era.
Thanks, Dee Dee, for leading it and keeping it going. We're with
You're
you.
welcome.
Great. I think we have time if we have 1 or 2 more questions or comments. Well, and if not, I just want to thank you. Oh, it looks like John has that one.
But just a quick one. I'm wondering about Dee Dee's relationship with folks like Lindsay and others who've been working in the Native American culture areas with Family Wise.
Sure. So I am collaborating with Susan and Lindsay and Brianna on the podcast. I'll actually be hosting episode 5 in season. What season are we in, Chris? 3?
Season 3.
Yeah. Oh, good. I got it right. Yeah. So I'm scripting for that right now, actually, and we're gonna interview a Boys Fort tribal member. So my focus is just to bring more tribal community members to the table. So I reached out to Danny Piratos, who is doing food sovereignty, but also has her own business around aeroponics, growing food. So that's coming up. But so Lindsay is kind of mentoring me on podcasting. Susan is encouraging me to take the lead on that interview podcast. As far as Lindsay does an amazing job with her historical trauma presentation, which correlates with the ACE interface presentation. I've already made referrals for her in the Duluth area with a couple law enforcement agencies because she's post-certified in that.
Mhm.
So, and just connecting, we're working together. If I have any questions or anything, I reach out to them and get their guidance.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. And Karen, I grew up in Nett Lake. I grew up in her couple houses down. I was friends with her daughter, Farah. So you're right. I probably do know all of your contacts, but that'll be great to have them.
Great.
All right, well, again, thank you all for coming today. It's we're really happy to have had you here. And I want to thank Dee Dee again for her wisdom and her leadership, and appreciate, and I'm excited about where she's bringing this work and how we can continue to support it. And thank you all. And I hope that you have a wonderful afternoon. And I hope that we see you in April for some Child Abuse Prevention Month activities. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you.